Prime Minister of Canada to see our federal government in Canada talk about Manitoba having a potential project of national importance. I don't know if we've had that since Manitoba entered Confederation, or perhaps since the railroads were constructed.
We're fast-tracking high-speed rail spanning 1,000 kilometers from Toronto to Montreal and Quebec City. And as we diversify our trade, we need our export terminals and our ports for our businesses to reach new markets.
The announcement barely made headlines at first. In Winnipeg in November 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney, standing beside Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, spoke calmly about railways, sovereignty, and global access as if they were parts of the same equation. To many listeners, it sounded abstract, but behind the measured language was a sharp signal. Canada was preparing to loosen a century-old dependency that had quietly shaped its economy. A $51 million federal commitment to railway upgrades hinted at something larger, a deliberate effort to reclaim control over how Canadian goods reach the world. For more than 100 years, Western Canada's exports followed a predictable route. Grain from the prairies, minerals from the interior, and energy products all moved south first, regardless of whether their final destination was Europe or Asia. American rail networks carried the cargo. American ports handled the loading. American companies controlled schedules, fees, and priorities. Even shipments bound for Europe often crossed U.S. soil because the infrastructure was already there. Canadian exporters accepted higher costs and limited control because alternatives seemed unreliable, risky, or simply unfinished. That neglected alternative was the Hudson Bay Railway, a 1,300-kilometer line stretching north through permafrost and muskeg to the Arctic coast. At its end sat the Port of Churchill, a gateway that once promised direct access to Europe across Hudson Bay. Over time, the railway became synonymous with disruption and delay. Harsh weather, unstable ground, and chronic underinvestment made it easier to dismiss as a relic than to see it as an asset. In policy circles, it was treated as a liability best forgotten. Political pressure from Washington helped change that mindset. During the presidency of Donald Trump, trade disputes and rhetorical threats sharpened Canadian anxieties about sovereignty and economic dependence. Voters elevated Carney with a mandate to push back, and his government began reassessing assets that had long been ignored. Instead of viewing the Northern Rail line as a burden, Ottawa reframed it as leverage. Combined federal and provincial investments eventually reached $262 million, aimed not at survival, but transformation. The goal was ambitious. Rebuild the Hudson Bay Railway to full Class 1 standards and move grain, fertilizer, critical minerals, and energy straight to tidewater without touching American soil. If successful, this corridor could redirect hundreds of billions of dollars in trade over the coming decade. It would alter long-standing logistics patterns and challenge U.S. railways and ports that once took Canadian traffic for granted. What had changed was not geography, but priorities. TO understands the significance of this shift. It helps to revisit the railway's troubled past. When the Hudson Bay Railway was conceived in the 1920s and built through the 1930s, it embodied national ambition. Prairie grain could travel north to Churchill, cross Hudson Bay, and reach Europe on a shorter route than the detour through eastern ports or the Panama Canal. On paper, the logic was compelling. The distance was shorter, the tolls were lower, and the strategic value was obvious. Reality proved harsher. The line crossed some of the most hostile terrain in North America. Permafrost shifted with seasonal temperature changes, undermining track stability. Muskeg swallowed roadbeds. Extreme cold weakened steel and warp rails. Flooding regularly washed out sections of track, forcing crews to rebuild the same areas repeatedly. Maintenance costs never stabilized because the ground itself refused to stay still. Even when trains ran, the Port of Churchill struggled with limited capacity. The Arctic shipping season was short, often just 4 months, dictated by ice conditions in Hudson Bay. Prairie farmers facing tight margins and strict delivery schedules found it faster and more predictable to ship grain south to establish American routes, even if those routes were more expensive. Reliability trumped national vision by the late 20th century. Federal patience had worn thin. Ottawa no longer viewed the railway as a strategic asset and sought to remove it from the public balance sheet. In the 1990s, the railway and port were sold to the American firm Omnitras for $1, a symbolic price that reflected how little confidence remained. Under private ownership, investment stayed minimal. Maintenance was deferred. The line deteriorated slowly until a major flood in 2017 severed it completely. Rail service stopped, repairs stalled, and the town of Churchill lost all surface transportation access for more than a year. In 2018, an unlikely coalition stepped forward. 41 First Nations communities and northern Manitoba municipalities purchased a railway and port, forming the Arctic Gateway Group. The move carried deep social and political meaning, restoring Indigenous control over critical infrastructure. Yet many analysts viewed it as symbolic rather than commercially transformative. The same obstacles remained: unstable ground, seasonal shipping limits, and entrenched southern trade routes. Few believed the line would ever matter beyond regional supply and community access. That assumption began to unravel as economic and political conditions shifted. Railways in North America are classified by track quality, load capacity, and reliability. Class 1 lines support heavy freight, high speeds, and consistent performance. Most major freight corridors operate at or near this level. The Hudson Bay Railway fell far below it, constrained by weight limits and slow speeds that made large-scale commercial use impractical. Heavy unit trains carrying bulk commodities simply could not run there. The November 2025 funding announcement marked a decisive break. With that passed, the commitment to rebuild the line, the full Class 1 standards, was not a routine maintenance program. It was a comprehensive reconstruction designed to solve problems that had crippled the railway for decades. Engineers focused on stabilizing track over permafrost with redesigned roadbeds. Modern rails and heavy-duty ties replaced outdated materials. Bridges and culverts were rebuilt to withstand higher loads and extreme weather events. Technology played a central role. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed to map subsurface conditions and identify weaknesses beneath the track before failures occurred. Sensors monitored temperature, moisture, and ground movement in real time, allowing preventative maintenance rather than reactive repairs. These tools transformed a railway once defined by unpredictability into one managed with data and foresight. The implications reach far beyond Manitoba. A functioning Arctic corridor gives Canada a direct outlet to Europe that bypasses American infrastructure entirely. It strengthens bargaining power in trade negotiations and reduces vulnerability to political pressure. For U.S. logistics giants, it introduces a competitor they once dismissed. For Canada, it represents something more fundamental: the ability to decide how its own wealth moves through the world. What was once a cautionary tale of ambition colliding with reality is being rewritten as a lesson in patience and timing. Geography did not change. Climate did not soften. What changed was a decision to treat forgotten railway not as a problem to abandon, but as a strategic tool worth rebuilding. LiDAR technology transformed how the railway was understood and managed. Detailed three-dimensional models captured subtle shifts in alignment that once went unnoticed until failures occurred. Drones now fly regular inspection routes over vast distances, spotting weaknesses long before they are visible from ground level. Sensors embedded along the line monitor movement in real time, while artificial intelligence analyzes the data to predict where problems are likely to emerge. Maintenance is no longer reactive. Crews intervene during planned windows, instead of racing to restore service after disruptions. For the first time in decades, the railway operates in its strongest and most stable condition. Yet upgrading the line to Class 1 standards means far more than smoother rides or heavier rails. It signals permanence. Companies that move bulk commodities commit to contracts years in advance, and they require certainty that infrastructure will not collapse halfway through delivery schedules. Reliability matters as much as distance or price. A Class 1 designation tells shippers the corridor can handle serious volumes without unexpected closures. It reduces risk, attracts private capital, and signals that this route is built to endure. Arctic Gateway Group has been clear about its intent. Chief Executive Chris Avery framed the upgrades as a foundation for long-term growth tied to Canada's national interest, not just regional survival. That distinction matters. It places a railway within a larger strategy of trade independence and economic resilience. The next question becomes what kind of cargo can justify investment on this scale. The answer spans nearly every major export category in Western and Northern Canada. Grain stands at the forefront. Saskatchewan and Manitoba produce vast quantities of wheat, canola, and specialty crops. Most of it currently moves west of Vancouver or south through American ports. Even when destined for Europe, Churchill offers a shorter Atlantic crossing. With Class 1 standards in place, unit trains carrying thousands of tons can move efficiently to tidewater. Expanded port capacity, paired with icebreaker support, extends the shipping season and opens the door to exports measured in millions of tons annually. For producers, this option shortens distance, reduces congestion, and eliminates intermediary fees tied to foreign infrastructure. Potash follows closely. Saskatchewan dominates global production, with roughly 95% of output exported. For decades, much of that material moved through American logistics networks before reaching overseas buyers. Heavy loads limited routing options, but Class 1 standards remove those constraints. Genesis Fertilizers has already signed agreements to move imports and exports through Churchill. Each ton shipped north represents revenue no longer captured by American railways, ports, and storage terminals. Critical minerals add another layer of strategic weight. Northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec contain significant deposits of nickel, lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, materials essential to advanced manufacturing, defense systems, and clean energy technologies. Infrastructure bottlenecks long made these resources costly to bring to market. Direct rail access to an Arctic port changes the economics entirely. Bulk minerals can now move straight to European refineries without routing through U.S. facilities. Arctic Gateway Group has constructed new mineral storage at Churchill and completed shipments to Europe in consecutive seasons, proving the model works beyond theory. Energy infrastructure broadens the scope further. Proposals under the Port Churchill Plus concept include corridors for